We were talking about Shakespeare and Elizabeth the last time, and I won't go on with a lot of that, but this was my own opinion is that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, that he is an original genius. It was not done by a committee, and it was not done. Typically, those who take the position that you have somebody of noble birth writing Shakespeare is because there is a sense of that somebody would have to have been trained at Oxford or Cambridge to do this kind of writing. That has always been considered a very elitist position to suggest that Shakespeare didn't do it because he didn't have the proper training. And in a sense, he wouldn't have the proper training unless he went to Oxford or Cambridge. But only nobility could go there at the time. So that sort of puts the zinger on it, that you really have to be a noble. It wasn't always true that you had to be noble to go to either one of those schools, but it certainly helped. But it's always been considered a very elitist sort of position, and I hear a lot of it around here. Sometimes in Shakespeare studies, but sometimes over in when you get material on Shakespeare from the Shakespeare Festival, when they talk about authorship of some of these plays, they'll bring in some of that scholarship and use it. I think the last time we talked, I indicated that, at least in my opinion, that Shakespeare, a lot of what Shakespeare writes is very close to the Greek tragedies, to the Greek dramatists, Aeschylus, Euripides, Sophocles. These were the greats, and he writes using a lot of their patterns. Yeah.
But doesn't that point to him having to have gone to Oxford or Cambridge in order to read the Greek and Latin?
You could get that from the English public school system. And that's, which I said is a private school system, which existed at the time. And Stratford was part of that system. That little schoolhouse was an English public school, where they taught, this is the Renaissance, and this is what's coming in to England through the Renaissance, was the use of Greek and Latin for training. It remained that until well into the mid-19th, or even late 19th century, the use of Greek and Latin, and you knew it in the original, you could write it in the original, you used it, and what did you study? You studied the Greek playwrights, many times. Or you studied Latin, Cicero's works, or the debates that Cicero had, Tusculan Disputation, those are things. You talk about some of the Greek minor writers, Aristophanes and so forth, writes about the birds, the grasshoppers, the wasps. But these are great. But Shakespeare seems to really understand this stuff. And he writes in the same vein. And so there's a lot that's going on here. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know definitively who did what. But I think the bottom line is there's absolutely no evidence, documentary evidence, to support that anybody other than Shakespeare wrote these things. I think that is the bottom line. Now, if you have a different opinion, and you believe that opinion, you know that opinion, you want to write about that, do so in your paper, that's fine. If you disagree with me, I don't care. Just so you defend yourself and do it well. That's what I care about. Yeah. Do you know your stuff? Can you do it well? Okay. Essentially, he developed a 20-man company called the Royal Theatre Company, sometimes called the King's Theatre Company. But he's patronized by Queen Elizabeth, I don't know how much the patronage was worth, but it was worth something. Received some money. He had roughly 20 players in his stock, and he kept those players most of their lives, the same group. He kept them employed because as he got older, they got older. He wrote his plays with the subjects in the plays being older for every 5 years or so. He puts that age on them. So he's able to use the players right along. You have the heroes and the protagonists all being a little older as Shakespeare as this thing goes on over a 20-year period. So it's a bit of a work of genius the way he did this. Really hands-on. The use of all the nautical terms, which would come from a sea town like London. You see, is it a sea town? Well, you're right on the Thames. You have the ships coming into the Thames. You have all kinds of interaction with European traders, English traders, nautical terms at all the pubs and taverns. Yeah, you have them all over the place, very common.
There was a play here called Equivocation a few years ago.
Was
that about later in Shakespeare's life when Elizabeth was dead and he was trying to appease?
You know, I can't remember. I'm trying to remember that play.
Yeah, it was
That's the one that you wrote for
I know I wrote something for it, and I can't remember it myself. That tells you how much I value what I read. I have no idea.
But it showed that his daughter was a lot. His daughter was very powerful over him.
Well, though women show up in his plays, he never used women in the plays. He always used young boys to play the parts of the girls. What's that great movie with, is it Paltrow?
Shakespeare?
Gwyneth Shakespeare.
Yeah, Shakespeare.
Yeah, it shows that. It's very, kind of a reverse on that, but it's very good. I don't think the stuff like Macbeth, Hamlet has ever been remotely duplicated in anybody's history. It's some of the greatest writing going. Now, sometimes I personally like Shakespeare. I liked it at Stratford. I don't always like it here. I know that's heresy in Ashland, but they think they invented Shakespeare. I mean, I know they do. And just ask them, they'll tell you, oh, no, it's not at him. No, it didn't. We don't do that here. So, but you go there, and when they're doing not Shakespeare does off Broadway, let's put it that way. When they're doing other than Shakespeare, that's one thing. But when they're doing Shakespeare, and they go to the outdoor theater, and they're doing, cannons are going and everything blowing up and so forth, and they're trying to react. They're doing these parts. I'm going. Sometimes I like it. Other times I think this is really. Read this. I'm going to fall asleep, and this is so bad. It's just freaking boring. But when I saw it at Stratford, it wasn't. They have a different take on it, and they develop it differently. So keep in mind that Ashland is not the center of Shakespeare, please. Okay. Just so when you answer, and I think I'm glad for what they do here. It keeps the price of my houses high. Because people just want to come here and live here, and I'm thinking, okay, so we got things for you that you're going to love, like the Ashland PD. You look the wrong way, you get a ticket. You're going to pay the 5% meals tax, whether you like it or not. It's just, it's just, and they love themselves here. Just ask them, Yeah. And they believe in toleration. They believe in what? Celebrate diversity. There is none. There's not. The only person of color in this whole town are our football team.
Yeah, that's true.
So, so I have to look, I go, celebrate diversity. What are you talking about? I love them. Anyway, so, get carried away. See, Winchester doesn't deal with these things. No. By the way, if you get a chance to go to England, spend some time in Winchester, or take an exchange with Winchester University, where he's visiting from. And that's kind of used to be our sister school here, with the exchange programs, especially in the history department. When Steve Reno was the provost here, and then later the president, he had started that whole exchange program way back. And I got to go there, I spent about a year there on that deal, plus it's another year of doing something, doing research. But I live Winchester, and the university is phenomenal. It's a great little school. It's not little, it's actually, I think it's bigger than ours.
Yeah, it is really.
Yeah, yeah. And it used to be on quarters, now it's on semesters. Yeah, okay. But it was totally enjoyable. The theater department was great, went to plays there. They were very, very good. Not that ours isn't, but it's still, it's different. And you're an hour from London, wonderful, had a great time. Hop the train, hop the Scottish Flyer, go up to shoot up to Edinburgh, it's what, half a day. It's wonderful, it's easy. And the cultural, I think, amenities are just beyond belief. It just blows your mind. It's great stuff. Okay, so much for that advertisement. They're not paying me for that. But it's a good experience. The Shakespeare players continue to, I'd say, suffer as well as most of the theater in England began to suffer after Elizabeth died in 1603. That now brought to the fore a certain group within the English Parliament and within the English Church that we haven't really discussed much at all. And that is, there had always been a segment, both in Parliament and in the Church, that believed that Elizabeth needed to marry, period. She needed to have a dynasty, she needed to have a son. And that element were, of course, the Protestants in England, the real Protestants of the Church of England, and those in Parliament. Most of those, not all of them, but most of those Protestants were of a particular ilk known as the Puritans. Now, are the Puritans, this is a familiar word because we have them in this country. We did. Today's, in the United States, the Congregational Church. How many have heard of the Congregational Church? There's one right down the street here. Got the big peace sign using Arabic letters, and another peace sign in English. Peace, peace, okay, salam, and then peace. Today considered a very, in American theology, very liberal. But in the 16th century and 17th, they were anything but liberal, they were very ultra-conservative. Politically conservative, culturally conservative, theologically Calvinist. And they wanted to see Elizabeth married in order to, what, promote a dynasty that's going to continue as a strong Protestant dynasty to face off against the Catholic powers. Most of them came from East Anglia. They were the most outspoken, most vociferous. And at the end of Elizabeth's life, they are the ones that begin to do the most criticism of things like the theater. They thought the theater was too frivolous. And so they were looking for a way to cut funds for Shakespeare and his players, but all the other theater, I'd say pretty much the playwrights were being heard at this time, the actors were being heard. Too frivolous. Well, the question is, now here's an interesting attitude. That I don't believe in this, and therefore you shouldn't either. Now, have you been exposed to this? Just because I don't like it, you don't like it either. Okay, that's just, it's horseshit. But nonetheless, that is a return to what we've already faced in the Catholic mantra: one law, one faith, one king. It seems like it's saying that in a different way. We don't believe in it, and therefore you shouldn't do it. So we'll see how that begins to play out. That's an attitude that's totally reversing whatever Elizabeth did during her life. Her life was what? Dedicated to toleration.
Yeah.
She's ahead of the game, as far as I'm concerned, on every score. She was ahead of the game in terms of the Elizabethan Compromise, which meant it's a rejection of one law, one faith, one king. You believe what you want, keep it to yourself. We're not going to bother you based on what you have on your conscience. We're not gonna question you for conscience sake. Just outwardly show your loyalty. And one of the things that she developed was this cult of the Virgin Queen. Why does that become so prominent according to so many historians? Because she is replacing the Virgin Mary in the minds of many Englishmen who just a generation earlier were Catholics and gave great veneration to Mary the Virgin. So according to this theory at least, she is finding a viable substitute for that in the mind of most English. So that she becomes the Virgin Queen, and her virginity becomes a national cause. It really takes on national implications in support of England, the Queen, the monarchy, the whole thing, based on her constantly refusing to marry. Was she really a virgin? I mean, I don't know. Who knows? I mean, there's no way of knowing. If you're gonna say yes, you're gonna have to prove it with a document, just like Shakespeare authorship. We can't prove that anymore. We can prove ancient aliens. It's out there, but you've gotta find, when you write papers on this stuff, you see this stuff, you have to be able to document it. You've gotta have documents to support it, and that's the problem with all these things. There are no documents to support it. But her virginity, the way she self-described it, and dressed like it, and acted like it, is something that really took on it's a huge spin, it's a huge image maker for her. So she really is building a national church and building a national, shrine to not necessarily the worship of the Queen or the worship of the crown, but to support the crown as a national image. So it takes on, you still have the religious connection, but you're substituting Elizabeth for the Virgin Mary. Virgin Elizabeth for the Virgin Mary. The early colonies that were opened up in her name became Virginia. Virginia Colony means the Virgin. Sir Walter Raleigh, Roanoke Colony. Back again with Virginia Colony, 1607. It becomes one of the largest settlement company in North America, coming from the English. But it takes on these names. Very important for the image. But slowly but surely, the Puritans in Parliament and the Puritans in the church are going to begin to bend and have sway. Powerful, you might say, almost right-wing sort of sway in the church and in public opinion that slowly begins to force Shakespeare out of business. By the time Shakespeare died in 1613, they had pretty well cut all the funding to almost all of the English theater. All of the English theater. Patronized by Elizabeth, religious toleration undergone by Elizabeth, saving England from the wrath of Philip II. She did some great things. There's no question about it. And in my opinion, which is, I'm not sure what it's worth, but there it is. She is I think the consummate monarch, certainly of the period, and I think probably one of the best monarchs, period, in English history for sure. Very forward-looking, real sense of religious toleration, real view of progress, moving ahead. She's a leader. She's moving forward, where most of the monarchs of the period were moving backwards. The tragedy is her legacy did not last more than one generation after her death in terms of the legacy of moving forward in the area of toleration. Because the Puritans in the church, who are going to want to purify the church from all of vestigial remnants of Catholicism. Will in fact, at some point, overstep their bounds. Reviews just totally reversed the religious toleration in their attempt to go after the first Stuart monarch, James I. But they'll reverse all of the gains that she made. England is the one country that had not had a calamity, a calamitous civil war within its boundaries. But when the Puritans come into play, and they're not handled correctly, and James I is going to walk right into it. We're going to talk about that, but that's going to be the second half of the quarter. As this develops, it's going to be a very hard thing for the English to practice anything outside of what the Puritan rules dictate. Even if you are a solid member of the Church of England, your theology's good, you're not Catholic in any vein, all that stuff doesn't matter. You are not pure enough. You have to purify yourself more than that in order to survive this new wave, this new almost cult that's moving into the church. The Puritans do not really represent the church. The Puritans represent the Calvinist minority in the church, which begins to move very, very hard, very, very fast after the death of Elizabeth. Yes?
Didn't they do some really stupid things like closing down all the pubs?
I don't think they were that stupid. I don't. No, that would have ruined them. What they did do was they stopped all the cockfighting. No, just let me rephrase that. There's no way to recover from that. Chicken fights, okay? Roosters.